I still remember the sound my phone made that night, a single vibration on the kitchen counter, sharp enough to cut through the quiet. I was setting the table, smoothing the cloth, matching the silver napkin rings to the plates. The roast was almost done. My hands smelled of rosemary and butter. I thought I was getting ready for family dinner. Instead, I was preparing for my own erasure. The message glowed on the screen. "Stay away from dinner, Mom. My husband doesn't want you there." For a moment, I didn't breathe. I read it twice. The second time hurt worse. The phone felt heavier than any truth I'd ever held. After everything I'd paid for, the trips, the villa, the wedding, I didn't even earn a chair at their table. My name is Olivia Hensley, 74 years old, once a teacher, now just a woman who believed love could be measured by the number of times she said yes. Remember to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below if you want to hear more. Grandma life stories filled with emotion, betrayal, and unexpected strength. I put the phone face down. The house fell back into silence, except for the steady tick of the clock on the mantel. Each second seemed to whisper, "You're no longer needed." Outside, the snow had started again, soft flakes drifting against the window like small, wordless apologies. I went to the window and watched the light from the neighbors' homes, families gathering. Laughter carried faintly through the night. It had been months since I'd last heard my daughter's voice without that edge, the tone she used when talking to someone she'd grown tired of. Lauren, my only child, my pride, once. I sat down at the table I'd set for two, out of habit. There was no one to eat with, but I poured the tea anyway. It steamed gently, carrying the scent of jasmine, the kind she used to love when she was little. I used to think the warmth of tea could fix everything. That night, it only showed me how cold the room had become. The phone blinked again, a picture from her social feed, their dinner, a long table under golden light. My daughter, her husband, their friends, glasses raised. She was laughing, head tilted just the way I used to when her father told stories. Only now the laughter wasn't shared with me. It was shared around me. I zoomed in, foolishly searching for something of myself in that frame. A dish I'd gifted, the vase I'd chosen for their anniversary. There was nothing, not even a trace of my handwriting on the little menu cards she once asked me to make. I put the phone down, slow, as if gentleness could make the betrayal smaller, but betrayal never shrinks. It only settles deeper. For years, I had told myself she was busy, that success had made her distant, not unkind, but that message, that single cold sentence, ended the lie. The kettle clicked off, the final sound before stillness took over. I looked around my kitchen, the soft yellow walls, the wooden spoons Jonas and I had bought at the farmer's market 30 years ago. My late husband had built this table. He said a good table always had room for one more. Now, even one seemed too many. I took a sip of tea, felt the heat on my tongue. It grounded me. "So," I whispered to the quiet, "this is how love ends." With a text. The clock struck 7. Dinner time for them. A lesson for me. I walked down the hallway lined with photographs. Lauren at her graduation, Lauren holding her baby, Lauren cutting the ribbon in front of her new real estate office. Every photo framed a version of her that still needed me. I stopped at the last one, the three of them in front of the Aspen Villa. Snow behind them, smiles perfect. I was behind the camera that day. She had said, "Mom, take one more. Make sure we all fit." We all did. Back then. The phone buzzed once more. A second message. Just 3 dots, then nothing. Deleted before I could read it. That somehow hurt even more. I sat again, folded my hands, and let the silence stretch. The house was too clean, too quiet, too polite, like me. Years of saying, "Of course, darling," had taught me to swallow pain until it sounded like patience. But tonight, patience tasted bitter. I stood up and opened the curtain wider. The snow kept falling, soft but relentless. Somewhere out there, they were clinking glasses. And here, in this house I'd built with my own hands, I felt something shift. Small, steady, unstoppable. It wasn't rage, Not yet. It was recognition. Recognition that love without respect is just a habit. Recognition that silence, when broken, can sound like power. I blew out the candle on the table. The flame wavered once, then disappeared, leaving behind a trail of smoke that curled upward, thin and gray. That was the night I realized they hadn't excluded me from dinner. They had erased me from their world. But they'd forgotten something important. I was the one paying for the lights in that world. And when the time came, I could turn them off. The roast was still warm the next morning. I hadn't thrown it away. I told myself I'd eat it later, but I didn't. I couldn't. The plate sat there all night. One fork, one knife, one seat untouched. It looked less like dinner and more like evidence. Evidence of a woman who still waited for her family, long after they'd stopped waiting for her. I carried the plate to the sink, but I didn't wash it. The gravy had turned dark, thick, almost frozen against the white porcelain. I stared at it for a long time. Somehow it felt wrong to clean it, like erasing proof that love used to live here. I used to think meals kept families together. I built every holiday, every birthday around the table. My late husband, Jonas, used to joke that I didn't just serve food, I served forgiveness. "You cook when you're hurt," he'd say. He was right. Back when Lauren was little, I cooked through every heartbreak she brought home. Failed exams, broken hearts, dreams that collapsed faster than they began. Every dish was a promise that she could start again, that we could start again. Now, the table was quiet, and all those promises felt like ghosts. I sat down with my tea, no sugar this time. The steam rose slowly, the same way thoughts do when you've been avoiding them. It had been 24 hours since that message, but the words still echoed in my head. "Stay away from dinner, Mom. There's something cruel about silence after cruelty. It's the way it pretends to be peace." My phone buzzed once, an alert. I thought maybe Lauren had changed her mind, maybe an apology. It wasn't. Just another notification from her social feed. New photos from last night's dinner. Her dress was gold. Evan's hand rested on her back. The caption read, "Family, laughter, and gratitude." Gratitude. For what? For erasing me politely? I turned off the screen and placed the phone face down again. The silence returned, steady and obedient. The light shifted across the kitchen floor, and for a moment I remembered another dinner, Lauren's wedding day. The same soft light, the same silver napkin rings. I stood at the head of the table then, giving a speech I'd written for weeks. I had said, "Marriage isn't built on love alone. It's built on memory, patience, and the ability to forgive." Everyone clapped. Lauren cried. Later that night, she had hugged me and whispered, "I'll never forget what you've done for me, Mom." I wonder if she remembers saying that. The walls of this house hold too many echoes. Every picture on them tells a different lie. Smiling faces, perfect frames, happiness that ended just before the shutter clicked. I went to dust the photographs. My hands hesitated on one of them, Lauren holding baby Chloe, standing in front of the old lake house. The corner of the photo had a faint scratch, right where my hand used to rest when I carried it to guests. In another frame, there was a picture of all four of us, Jonas, Lauren, baby Chloe, and me. That one sat in the living room. I hadn't noticed before, but the glass was cracked, a thin fracture running between Lauren and me. It looked almost deliberate. I picked it up carefully, wiped the dust away. Behind the photo, folded flat, was a piece of old newspaper, an article about Aspen real estate. A headline circled in red, "Luxury villas projected to double in value." I felt a small twist in my chest. It wasn't anger yet, not exactly. More like a question finally finding its voice. Had love always been this transactional, and I just refused to see it? I sat back on the sofa, holding the frame to my chest. The window across from me reflected my own face, soft hair graying, eyes tired but alert. Somewhere in that reflection, I could almost see Jonas beside me, his hand resting over mine. He would have told me to stop making excuses for people who stopped making room for me. The kettle whistled again. I poured another cup of tea. Warm, fragrant, loyal, everything my family no longer was. I thought about the Aspen villa, the photos Lauren sent when they first bought it. Wide windows, a fireplace taller than me, a mountain view that looked like a postcard. She called it our family retreat. I was proud, so proud that I didn't even ask whose name was on the deed. I paid for the down payment. I remember signing the check. It's an investment in family, Evan had said. A legacy. Now sitting here alone, I realized legacies can vanish faster than steam over a cup of tea. I went back to the dining room and looked at the empty plate again. The roast was gone now, cleaned up earlier out of habit. The only thing left was a faint ring of sauce, perfectly round. It looked like a boundary I should have drawn years ago. My fingers brushed the edge of the plate, cold, solid, honest, unlike people. I carried it to the cabinet and placed it back in its place, between the others that had forgotten what it meant to be used. Through the window, snow kept falling. It didn't rush. It didn't beg to be noticed. It just fell, steady and silent. I envied that. I whispered, "You were right, Jonas. Forgiveness feeds others, but it starves the one who serves it too long." My reflection in the glass looked older suddenly, not weaker, just quieter. There's a kind of strength that doesn't need to shout. The phone buzzed once more, a message from the grocery store app. "Your payment has been processed." I stared at it, and a thought, small but sharp, formed in my mind. How many payments have I made without thinking? Maybe that's what motherhood had become for me. Automatic transactions of affection. I closed my eyes. The sound of the clock returned, a metronome marking the rhythm of my own awakening. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the urge to call Lauren. I didn't need to explain, to smooth things over, to pretend the plate wasn't empty. It was empty because the love had been spent. I turned off the lights in the kitchen, leaving only the glow of the snow outside. The room looked softer that way, less like a wound, more like a memory. Tomorrow, I told myself, I would open the drawer with the old bank receipts. I would start to understand where all that love had gone, and what it had really cost me. But for tonight, I let the silence stay. It was the first silence that didn't feel like punishment. The plate was empty. But for the first time, I wasn't. I woke up before sunrise, the house still wrapped in gray silence. Denver winters have a way of pressing down on you, reminding you how small you are. I opened the curtains just enough to see the faintest line of light over the mountains. Somewhere beyond those ridges was Aspen, where my daughter lived the life I helped her build, in a house that had my fingerprints on every wall, but not my name on a single paper. I made tea, as always. The first sip burned, sharp and grounding. I needed that burn. I pulled out the old folder from the drawer beside the fridge, the one labeled Family Accounts. I hadn't touched it in years. Dust had gathered at the corners, and the elastic band broke when I tried to open it. Inside were neatly stacked documents, receipts, invoices, scanned transfers. So many of them carried the same name, Aspen Property Development, LLC. My name appeared beside it over and over, the signature I used so casually back then, Olivia Hensley. $700,000 for the down payment, $48,000 for interior furnishings, monthly transfers, property taxes, insurance, maintenance. The list went on. Each transaction was a quiet act of love, disguised as practicality. They had called it our family villa. Evan had pitched the idea with that polished charm of his. "It'll be a legacy, Mom," he'd said, voice full of easy confidence. "Somewhere Chloe can bring her kids someday." Lauren had nodded beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "You'd love it there, Mom. It feels like home." I had smiled. That's what I always did when she sounded certain. I didn't ask for proof or contracts or promises. I just wrote the check. I remembered that day vividly now. Aspen had been dazzling, snow piled like sugar over the rooftops. Evan talked numbers. Lauren talked about curtains and marble countertops. I talked about memories, how Jonas once said every home should have a window that faced morning light. They both smiled politely and changed the subject. When we closed the deal, the agent congratulated them. "Mr. and Mrs. Madsen, this property will appreciate fast." He never said my name. I laughed it off then, proud and naive. "They're young," I said. "They deserve a head start." Now, looking at those documents, the truth landed heavy. It wasn't a head start. It was a handover. I scrolled through my bank's online portal. 176 automatic payments. Scheduled, precise, efficient. Mortgage, insurance, property management, utilities. I had set them all up years ago just to make their lives easier. Love, I realized, can become a habit of convenience for everyone except the one giving it. The last payment had gone through 2 days ago. The same day, Lauren texted me not to come to dinner. I exhaled slowly. My breath fogged the window. Beyond it, the sun was beginning to color the horizon, pale gold against blue frost. Somewhere in Aspen, their morning would look the same, but brighter, newer, younger. I opened another folder labeled Legal Documents. Inside, there was the property deed. I read the names carefully, twice. Evan Madsen and Lauren Madsen. No Olivia, no Hensley, nothing. My chest tightened. I wasn't angry yet. Anger still felt too big, too loud for the room I was in. This was something quieter, colder. The kind of realization that doesn't break you, it hardens you. I remembered the day they first moved in. Lauren had sent me a video. Chloe running through the snow, laughing, shouting, "Grandma, this is our forever house!" My voice cracked when I played it back then. I didn't realize it would be the last time I'd hear her call it ours. I closed the laptop and leaned back. The hum of the heater filled the silence, steady and rhythmic. I stared at the folder in front of me. So much paper, so much proof. If love had a ledger, mine was full and unpaid. A knock at the door startled me. It was the mailman, holding a small package. "Morning, Mrs. Hensley," he said. "Got a delivery from Aspen." Aspen. The word hit harder than I expected. I signed for it, my hand trembling slightly. Inside was a holiday card, gold-embossed letters on thick white paper, a photo of Lauren, Evan, and Chloe in front of the villa, smiling, snow falling softly around them. The card read, "Wishing you warmth, health, and joy this season, from our family to yours, our family to yours." There was no signature, no message, no love, Lauren, just a printed line. Professional, distant, perfect. I stared at it for a long time before setting it beside the teacup. The contrast was almost poetic, something warm beside something frozen. I whispered to myself, "They built a life with my money, and they sent me a photo to prove it." The kettle had gone quiet by now. Only the ticking clock filled the space. I got up, walked to the bookshelf, and pulled out an old photo album, one from when Jonas was still alive. He had been a man who believed in paper trails. "Someday," he used to say, "you'll need to know where every dollar went. Money tells a story faster than words." I flipped through pages, tuition bills, down payments, donation receipts. I'd paid for college, for cars, for that villa, for their stability. I had been the silent sponsor of their entire adulthood, and yet somehow I was the one deemed unwelcome at dinner. I picked up the card again, looked at the villa behind them. The porch light glowed faintly in the photo. I had paid the electric bill too. I stood at the counter, watching the steam fade from my cup. "Jonas," I murmured, "I think I finally understand what you meant when you said not all investments return profit." I took a blank notebook from the drawer, one I hadn't used since my teaching days. On the first page, I wrote 176, then beneath it stop. It looked small, almost insignificant on paper, but the act of writing it made my hands feel steady for the first time in years. I closed the folder, pressed my palm over it like sealing a chapter. Somewhere deep inside, beneath the ache and the disbelief, a new kind of calm began to rise. Not gentle, not forgiving, just certain. I walked to the window again. The snow outside shimmered faintly, untouched. In the distance, I imagined the Aspen Villa gleaming under the same morning sun, a house full of light built on shadows of trust. They thought my generosity was endless. They forgot who taught them how to sign their names. Tomorrow, I would start undoing what I had built, not to punish them, but to remember myself. The phone rang just after noon, when the sunlight had turned thin and almost colorless. I was still at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers, quiet witnesses of what I'd refused to see for years. The caller ID glowed. Lauren. For a moment, I didn't move. Then I answered. "Hi, Mom," she said, her voice syrupy and polite, the kind people use when they want to sound kind but keep control. "Are you doing okay?" I didn't answer. I wanted her to feel the pause, the one I'd swallowed 1,000 times before. She rushed to fill it. "Evan thinks it's better this way," she went on, tone careful. "You know, less tension, fewer misunderstandings." I said softly, "Better for who?" Silence, then a breath, half sigh, half annoyance. "Mom, please don't make this emotional. We're all adults here." I almost laughed. "You're right," I said. "Adults should understand consequences." Her tone stiffened. "I'll call you later, okay? Take care of yourself." Then she hung up. I stared at the phone for a long time. My reflection in the black screen stared back, lips pressed, eyes still, that same careful expression she wore in photos, a smile that pretended to belong. I realized I'd taught her that expression, the art of composure even while something breaks inside. I set the phone down and walked to the hallway. The photos lined the walls in perfect order. Graduations, birthdays, the wedding, Chloe's first steps. Once they felt like proof of a life well lived. Now they looked like a trail of evidence. I lifted the first frame. Dust had settled behind it, leaving a faint outline on the wallpaper. Then another frame, and another. One by one, I gathered them, carrying every smiling memory to the dining table. When I set them down, the glass faces caught the winter light. The smiles shimmered, perfect, bright, hollow. I sat. I studied each photo, tracing the curve of her mouth, the tilt of her head. There was a pattern, the same frozen smile, elegant and safe, the same performance she'd given me today on the phone. I picked up the wedding photo. Her white dress glowed beneath the chandelier, Evan's hand on her waist, my own face blurred in the background, mid-laugh, mid-belief. That was the day I thought I'd done everything right. I looked down at the papers still open beside the photos. Lines of numbers, transactions, legal phrases. I skimmed through them again, slower this time, until my eyes caught a small line at the bottom of a page. Her name. Not mine. No need to read more. I knew what it meant. Access, control, quiet authority I had given away with my trust. The calmness she used now wasn't new. It was inherited. That realization didn't sting. It froze, like air sucked from the room. I stood and walked to the window. Outside, snow had started falling again, slow and deliberate. The flakes gathered on the sill, each one silent and determined. I touched the glass and felt the chill through my skin. For years I thought betrayal came with shouting, doors slammed, accusations flying. But no, it's quieter than that. It arrives in small, soft sentences like, "It's better this way." It hides inside polite tones and gentle voices. Jonas used to tell me, "Some wounds come wrapped in kindness." I hadn't understood him then. Now I did. I turned back to the table. The photos gleamed faintly, all that laughter trapped behind glass. I began turning them face down, one after another. The sound of glass touching wood was soft but sharp, like small doors closing one by one. When I reached the last photo, the four of us at the lake, I paused. Lauren was smiling at the camera, her eyes squinting from the sun, her arm linked with mine. I pressed my thumb against that image and whispered, "You did learn from me, didn't you?" Not an accusation, just truth. The clock ticked faintly in the background. The house felt smaller but strangely balanced, like it had been tilted for years and finally leveled itself. I sat back down and let the silence stay. This wasn't the silence of loneliness anymore. It was the silence of understanding. I stacked the papers neatly, the corners aligned, the order restored. I brushed the dust off my hands, then exhaled. My reflection in the window had changed. Not softer, not sadder, just clearer. The same faint smile lingered, but it wasn't hers anymore. It was mine. It wasn't a mask. It was armor. Outside, the snow thickened, coating everything in a slow, steady whiteness. It didn't shout or demand. It simply covered the world, patient and relentless, until nothing messy showed through. For the first time, I understood the peace of that, the beauty of quiet correction. I looked around the room once more, the table, the folders, the photographs turned down, and whispered to myself, calm and certain, all right then. If this was how she wanted distance, I would show her what distance truly meant. And as the last bit of light faded from the window, I sat there under the hum of the heater, feeling nothing but the soft, steady pulse of resolve. That night, the wind moved around the house like it was searching for a way in. I sat at the kitchen table again, the same chair, the same light. The folder lay open, its edges curling slightly from how many times I'd touched it. Every page told a story I'd stopped reading too soon. The snow outside had stopped, but the world still looked pale and emptied out. I turned on the lamp, and the light caught the rim of my teacup, the same cup from last night, a faint circle of tea still at the bottom. I hadn't washed it. I wanted to see what remained after the warmth was gone. I opened the laptop. The glow hit my face, and for a moment I looked older than I felt. The login screen blinked, waiting. My hands hovered above the keys. Jonas used to say money was just a mirror. It shows you what you value. I was about to find out what mine had been showing all along. The bank portal opened. Neat, quiet, organized. My account, my signature, my trust, all lined up in perfect order. I scrolled through the transaction list, each month, each deduction, perfectly punctual. The digital trail of devotion. Mortgage, utilities, insurance, renovations. Each word was a quiet echo of the same sentence. You made this possible. I clicked open the Scheduled Payments tab. A list appeared, stretching down the screen like a staircase. It looked endless. Each line was a reminder of how easy it is to give without noticing what it takes. For a long time, I just stared at it. Then I whispered, "Enough." My hand steadied as I moved the cursor. I selected the first payment, the mortgage, and clicked Cancel. The screen hesitated, asking politely, "Are you sure?" "Yes," I said aloud. The word felt strange, small, final, clean. I canceled the next one, and the next. Each confirmation clicked like a lock turning. The sound was soft but certain. For years I had pressed send. That night I pressed stop. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't even feel triumphant. Just calm. The kind that comes when you finally decide you're done apologizing for surviving. The lamp flickered once, and I smiled faintly. Even the light seemed to hesitate, unsure how to exist in a room that no longer needed permission. I reached for the phone and scrolled to a number I hadn't dialed in months. Mr. Reynolds, Summit Trust Bank. He used to handle our accounts when Jonas was alive. A practical man, patient, always polite. He answered on the second ring, his voice groggy but warm. "Mrs. Hensley, everything all right?" "I hope so," I said. "I'd like to cancel all standing payments connected to the Aspen property, immediately." A pause. "That's quite a few, ma'am. May I ask if something happened?" "I realized I've been financing my own absence," I replied. He was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "Understood. I'll process it right away. You'll receive confirmation tonight." "Thank you," I said. "And please remove any additional access names on file. Consider it done." When I hung up, I didn't cry. I didn't even exhale. I just sat there, letting the quiet stretch, long and clean. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed with the first notification. Payment terminated. Mortgage Aspen property. Then another. Transfer blocked. Then another. One by one, they appeared like falling dominoes, each message erasing a little piece of the past. Somewhere in Aspen, their phones would start buzzing soon too. Lauren and Evan, startled at the same time, their perfect routine glitching. Maybe she'd check the account and find the numbers frozen, the comfort gone. Maybe she'd call me in panic, the way children call for help when the light goes out. But I wouldn't answer. Not out of cruelty, but because answering would undo everything this silence had just built. I opened my old leather notebook, the one Jonas used to keep ledgers in. Inside, there were yellowed pages covered in his handwriting, tidy, elegant, confident. He'd always written in ink. "Pencil fades," he'd say. "Mistakes shouldn't disappear that easily." I found a blank page and wrote, December 12th, Aspen account closed. Then beneath it, lesson, love without limits becomes debt. The pen didn't shake. The line of ink was straight and deliberate. I closed the notebook and rested my hand on it for a while. The leather was smooth and warm from my touch, as if it remembered every time Jonas had done the same. The clock ticked softly in the background. The world had gone still again. For once, I didn't feel small in that stillness. I poured another cup of tea, fresh water, fresh leaves, steam curling upward in thin silver ribbons. It filled the room with the scent of jasmine, quiet and steady. I lifted it to my lips and whispered, "To control." The taste was clean, simple, real. I stood and looked out the window. The snow had stopped falling, leaving a glassy layer over the yard. The world outside looked frozen but bright, untouched, like a promise waiting for someone brave enough to keep it. I thought of Lauren again, the way she'd smiled in that photo, the confidence in her eyes, the way she'd always assumed I'd be there to catch her. Maybe tomorrow she'd realize I wasn't. And when she did, maybe she'd remember who taught her how to stand up straight when the ground shifted. The notifications kept coming, quiet pings breaking the silence, each one a message from the universe. You are no longer responsible for anyone's comfort but your own. When the last one arrived, I turned off the laptop. The glow faded, and my reflection appeared faintly on the black screen, calm, unhurried, alive. I smiled. Not the frozen kind, not the practiced one. A real, small smile that felt like movement after years of stillness. "Good night, Lauren," I whispered, "and good morning, me." The words lingered in the air, soft but solid. I hadn't said my own name aloud like that in years. It sounded like someone worth knowing. I blew out the candle on the table. The room darkened, but I didn't feel the usual chill. Somewhere, far away, a house in Aspen flickered with confusion. A world that used to orbit around my kindness suddenly standing still. I wasn't angry. I wasn't vengeful. I was just awake. And awakening, I realized, isn't loud. It's quiet, steady, precise, like clicking cancel one payment at a time until your life finally starts belonging to you again. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the kitchen in a pale, forgiving way. I hadn't slept, but I wasn't tired either. There's a strange calm that comes after you finally stop pretending, like the quiet air right after a storm passes. The kettle hissed softly on the stove. I poured myself tea, jasmine again, because routine still felt safer than joy. The house was still, filled with that kind of silence that listens back at you. Then the phone rang. I froze, my hand halfway to the cup. For a heartbeat, I thought it was Lauren, or worse, Evan. I almost let it ring out, but when I glanced at the screen, the name stopped me. Chloe, my granddaughter, my little echo of hope. I pressed accept. "Hi, sweetheart," I said, trying to sound calm. There was a pause, the sound of her breath, soft, uncertain. "Grandma?" "Yes, it's me," I whispered. Her voice brightened just slightly. "Hi, I wasn't sure if you'd answer." "I always answer for you," I said. She hesitated, then spoke quickly, like she was afraid someone might hear. "Mom said you were tired." I smiled faintly. "No, honey, I'm not tired, just finally awake." There was quiet on the line for a few seconds, the kind that feels full, not empty. "I didn't believe her," Chloe said finally. You never sound tired in your letters." I blinked, surprised. "You still keep those?" "All of them," she said proudly. "They're in a box under my bed. Mom says you write too much about feelings, but I like it." A soft laugh escaped me. "Your mom's not wrong. I've always had too many words." "I like your words," she replied. "They sound like hugs." That sentence hit me deeper than she could ever know. "Thank you, sweetheart," I said quietly. "How's school?" "Busy," she sighed. "Boring. But we're doing a project about family history." "Oh?" I said. "Yeah," she continued. "We have to interview someone in our family and record their story. Can I come see you this weekend? Please?" I smiled at the empty kitchen. "I'd love that." There was a rustle on her end, then her voice dropped to a whisper. "Mom said maybe not this week. She said you need rest. But I told her you don't need rest. You need people who listen." My throat tightened. I took a slow breath before answering. "Your mother's just protecting what she understands," I said softly, "even if it's not the right thing." Chloe was silent for a long time. I could almost hear her thinking. When she spoke again, her voice was small. "Grandma, did you know Mom and Dad bought a new car?" I froze. "A car?" "Yeah," she said. "She told me it's a reward for their hard work. But I saw her phone screen by accident. The payment came from your account." I stared at the window, where the snow outside had begun to melt in the sunlight. My reflection looked calm, but my hand gripped the cup tighter. "Sometimes people think love is a wallet that never closes," I said softly. "But it does, eventually." "I don't get it," she murmured. "You're the nicest person I know. Why would they—" "Because kindness makes some people comfortable," I interrupted gently. "Too comfortable. They stop seeing it as kindness and start thinking it's something they're owed." There was another silence, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was careful, almost sacred. "Grandma," she said quietly, "I wish I could come over right now." "You will," I said. "Soon. I'll make that cinnamon crust pie you love." She laughed, a soft, breathy laugh that filled the whole room. It was the kind of sound that makes everything brighter. "Deal," she said. Her laugh lingered even after she stopped talking, and for the first time in days, I felt warmth spread through the room. "Grandma?" she said again, more serious now. "Mom says you're too emotional sometimes, but I think you just feel things louder than she does." I smiled sadly. Maybe. Or maybe she learned to whisper when she should have cried. The line went quiet again. I didn't rush her. Some silences don't need fixing. I looked around the room. The morning light had found its way to the family albums still left open on the table. The photo on top showed Chloe at 6, frosting on her nose, sitting on my lap, both of us laughing at something out of frame. "Do you still draw?" I asked suddenly. "Sometimes," she said. "Not much lately." "You should," I said. "Draw something for me this week. Bring it when you visit." "Okay," voice smiling. "Can it be a surprise?" "I'd love that." There was a small pause. Then she said softly, "You're my favorite person, Grandma." I closed my eyes, letting the words settle. "You're mine too, sweetheart." I heard a car door slam in the background. Her voice turned hurried. "I have to go. Mom's home. Don't tell her I called, okay?" "Of course not," I said. "This stays between us." "Bye, Grandma." "Bye, love." The line clicked off. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It hummed. It had shape, warmth, meaning. I sat there, holding the cup between my hands, feeling the faint heat fade. Then I reached for a small wooden box on the shelf, one I hadn't opened in years. Inside were drawings, old cards, and letters from Chloe. Stick figures holding hands, hearts drawn in pink crayon. A crooked sentence that said, "To Grandma, my hero." I smiled, the kind of smile that hurts a little first. That same drawing had once hung on the fridge in the Aspen Villa, until Lauren replaced it with a stainless steel one. She'd taken it down herself, saying, "It doesn't match." but it matched perfectly now. This quiet morning, this fragile peace, this truth I could finally see. I set the drawing beside the folder of bank papers still on the table. One proof of love, one proof of betrayal. They looked almost identical in the light. "At least one heart in that house still beats for love," I whispered, "not for gain." Then I took a sip of tea. It had cooled, but it was still sweet. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel erased. I felt remembered. 2 days later, I drove into downtown Denver under a pale winter sky. The air felt sharp, almost metallic, like it was reminding me to stay alert. The city was waking up, cars humming, people rushing with coffee cups in hand. But inside the car, it was silent except for the low rhythm of the heater. My hand stayed steady on the wheel. I hadn't felt this kind of focus in years. I parked in front of a narrow building of red brick and glass. A brass plaque by the door read, "Harper Alvarez, Attorney at Law." I remembered the name from a lifetime ago. Harper had worked with Jonas when he was alive. Calm, precise, a woman who never raised her voice, but always got the last word. The elevator creaked on the way up. I caught my reflection in the mirror panel. Neat gray coat, scarf tied carefully, lips pressed in something that wasn't quite a smile. I looked like someone going to settle business, not beg for understanding. The office smelled faintly of old paper and lemon polish. Harper stood by the window, tall and composed, her silver hair pulled into a bun that somehow made her look both softer and stronger. When she saw me, she smiled. "Olivia Hensley," she said. "It's been too long." "Too long," I replied, and meant it. We shook hands, and for the first time in days, I felt something close to solid ground beneath me. She gestured toward the chair across her desk. "Jonas used to talk about you every time we met," she said warmly. "He'd brag that you could make sense of any mess." I let out a quiet laugh. Seems I forgot to apply that to my own life. Harper studied me with that lawyer's kind of stillness, the kind that listens beyond words. "You're here for a reason. Tell me what's happened." I placed a folder on her desk. She opened it and scanned the papers quickly, her expression barely shifting. The list of transactions, the frozen payments, the shared authorizations, all of it. When she finally looked up, her eyes were steady. "You've been generous, Olivia. Too generous." "I used to think generosity kept the peace," I said. "But peace built on silence isn't peace. It's surrender." Harper nodded slowly. "What do you want to do?" I took a breath. "I want to make sure they can't touch another cent of my money. Not now, not after I'm gone. I want control back, and I want to protect what's left, especially for my granddaughter." She leaned back, thoughtful. "You're talking about a trust, then? One that bypasses Lauren and Evan entirely?" "Yes," I said, "and I want it done quietly. No warnings, no explanations. Just truth, on paper." Harper smiled slightly, not out of amusement but respect. "That's the smartest sentence I've heard all week." She pulled out a clean sheet of paper and began making notes. "We'll draft a living trust that places full authority in your hands. Chloe can be the beneficiary when she turns 21. Everything else, liquid assets, property, investment shares, we reallocate under your name only. You'll sign here, here, and here." The sound of the pen scratching against paper filled the room. It was rhythmic, deliberate, like stitching up a wound. Harper paused halfway through and glanced at me. "You know," she said quietly, "Evan came by my office about 3 months ago." I looked up. "He did?" "Yes. Said he was handling family financial transitions. Asked questions about your accounts, about estate planning. I told him I couldn't disclose anything, of course. He left politely, but I could tell he wasn't used to being told no." A slow chill crawled up my spine. "He was preparing for something," I said. Harper nodded. "People like him usually are, which is why we act now." I didn't answer. I just reached for the pen again. My signature came out neat and sharp. I watched the ink dry, feeling the weight of each letter. Proof that this time the decisions belonged to me. When it was done, Harper slid the final document toward me. "It's official," she said. "You've reclaimed full authority over your estate. The trust will be activated immediately, and Lauren and Evan are legally excluded from any claim." I traced my finger along the paper's edge. "That was easier than I thought." "It's always easier when you've already made the hard decision," Harper said. Outside, the wind picked up, brushing against the window with a low whistle. It sounded like applause from a distance. "I'll have certified copies sent to your home and one deposited safely at Summit Trust," Harper continued. "Mr. Reynolds still works there, yes?" I nodded. "He does." "Good," she said. "He's reliable. He'll keep this secure." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The light through the window had changed, softer, golden, spilling across the desk and touching the silver frame that held a picture of Harper and her daughter. She noticed my gaze and smiled faintly. "She stopped speaking to me for 5 years," she said quietly. "Didn't like how much time I spent working. But when her own daughter turned 16, she came back." "Because she understood?" I asked. "Because she needed to," Harper said. "Sometimes love only circles back when it's ready to face what it took for you to survive." Her words landed deep, steady. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Harper stood and extended her hand again. "You've done the right thing, Olivia. You've turned emotion into structure. That's where real power lives." I shook her hand, firm and sure. "Thank you," I said, "for giving me back my name on paper." She smiled. "It was always yours. You just forgot to claim it." Outside, the city felt louder, but not unfriendly. The noise of traffic, the hum of engines, the wind cutting between tall buildings, all of it sounded like movement, progress. I walked slowly to my car, the signed folder tucked neatly under my arm. The winter air bit at my cheeks, but I didn't mind. It felt like clarity. When I reached the car, I looked at the folder again before opening the door. Inside it was everything I had built, lost, and reclaimed. My years, my effort, my voice. I whispered to myself, "Love blinded me. Law opened my eyes." Then I started the engine, pulled into the street, and for the first time in a very long while, I didn't feel like someone's mother, someone's burden, or someone's forgotten name. It was late afternoon when the doorbell rang. The light outside had turned soft and amber, the kind that makes everything look honest for a few short minutes before dark falls. I knew before I even opened the door who it was. Only one person knocked like that. 3 short taps, a pause, then one longer, impatient one. Lauren stood on the porch, dressed in her usual perfection, beige coat, gold earrings, hair pinned back just enough to look effortless. She wore her smile like a badge, bright and practiced. "Hi, Mom," she said, her voice too sweet to be real. "Lauren," I replied evenly, "you didn't call." "I wanted to surprise you," she said, stepping past me without waiting to be invited. The faint smell of her perfume lingered behind her, sharp and floral. She glanced around the living room. "You've redecorated?" "No," I said. "I've just cleaned." She gave a small, hollow laugh. "Right." Then her tone softened, or tried to. "We missed you at dinner the other night." I walked toward the kitchen. "Did you?" She followed. "Mom, come on. You know I didn't mean for things to sound the way they did. Evan he thought maybe a little space would help." "Help what?" I asked. Her expression faltered for half a second, then reset itself. "You know, help everyone adjust. We've all been under a lot of stress." I poured 2 cups of tea. "Stress," I repeated quietly. "That's an interesting word for betrayal." Lauren's smile flickered. "Mom, please don't start with—" "I'm not starting," I said, sliding a cup across the table. "I'm continuing." She sat down reluctantly, crossing her legs, her fingers tapping against the porcelain cup. "You've always been dramatic," she muttered. I leaned back in my chair. "And you've always been ungrateful. Maybe we both stayed consistent." Her jaw tightened. "What is this about? Evan said something about the bank calling this morning. Payments being canceled? Are you having trouble managing things?" I looked at her for a long moment. No, I said finally. I'm managing just fine. She blinked, confused. Then why? I decided to stop financing the villa, I interrupted, my tone calm but sharp enough to cut through her words. And the utilities? And the cleaners? And the car? In short, everything that wasn't mine to maintain anymore. Her eyes widened, her practiced charms slipping for the first time. You can't do that. I already did, I said. The room went quiet. The only sound was the faint whistle of wind outside. Lauren's face stiffened, her lips parting as if searching for the right angle, the right lie to crawl behind, her voice dipping into a rehearsed softness. This isn't just about money. It's about family. About trust. Trust? I echoed. You mean the kind of trust that lets someone sign their name where mine should be? Her body froze. What are you talking about? Don't insult me, I said quietly. You know exactly what I'm talking about. She tried to laugh, but it came out thin. Evan handles most of the paperwork, Mom. Maybe he... Stop, I said, cutting her off. You've been authorizing transactions from my accounts for months. Don't pretend ignorance now. For a moment, the old version of her reappeared. The child who used to look scared when she was caught lying about broken dishes or missing cash from my purse. But this time, she didn't apologize. She smiled instead, brittle and defensive. You're overreacting. It's just financial housekeeping. No, I said softly. It's theft, dressed up as duty. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. You're being ridiculous, she snapped. Evan and I have done everything for this family. We've built something together, and you're trying to ruin it because you're lonely. I looked at her with a stillness that made her flinch. You built it with my money, Lauren. You just forgot whose foundation you were standing on. Her breathing grew faster. Do you know how hard it is to keep up appearances? Do you know what people would say if they thought we couldn't afford our own home? I do, I said, because I'm the one who made sure they never said it. The silence that followed stretched like glass, thin and dangerous. She finally said, You wouldn't understand. You've never had to fight for your place in the world. I smiled faintly. No, darling, I just bought everyone else's. For a moment, she looked lost. Then her expression hardened again. You're being unfair. Evan's furious. He says you've jeopardized everything we've worked for. He wants to... Evan doesn't get to want anything from me ever again, I said coldly. Her voice rose, high and sharp. You can't just cut us off like that. Yes, I can, I said, standing. And I have. Her eyes glistened with anger more than tears. I can't believe you'd do this to your own daughter. I walked to the counter, took a slow sip of tea, and turned back to her. You stopped being my daughter when you started signing my name. She stared at me, open-mouthed. You don't mean that. But I did. She tried to regain control, her tone softening again. Mom, listen. We can fix this. Maybe we just need to talk things through. Maybe... There's nothing to fix, I said, setting the cup down. There's just truth, and now it's on the table. Lauren's composure cracked. Evan said you wouldn't notice, she blurted before she could stop herself. The words hung there, thick and cold. I didn't react right away. I simply tilted my head, meeting her eyes. Did he? I said quietly. Then I guess he doesn't know me as well as he thinks. She seemed to realize what she'd just admitted. I didn't mean... Yes, you did, I said. And for once, I'm glad you did. The silence stretched again. Then she grabbed her purse, her voice shaking with a mix of fury and humiliation. You'll regret this, Mom. You can't just walk away from family. I looked at her steadily. I'm not walking away. I'm closing a door that should have been shut a long time ago. She stared at me one last time, her mouth trembling between rage and disbelief, then turned and stormed out. The front door slammed, and the sound echoed through the house like thunder. I stood still for a while, the air vibrating around me. Then, slowly, I sat back down at the table, reached for the cup of tea she hadn't touched, and poured it down the sink. The steam rose, twisting into the air, fading as quickly as her words had. I whispered to the quiet room, "Peace doesn't always sound gentle." Then I wiped the counter clean, placed the empty cup upside down, and let the house settle back into silence. The snow had started again that evening, heavy this time, falling in thick white veils that blurred the outlines of everything. I stood by the window, watching it coat the trees, the driveway, the steps where Lauren had stood hours earlier, shouting about betrayal. Her car was still parked by the curb, the engine running, her headlights spilling weak light through the storm. I knew she'd be back. People like Lauren never leave until they've had the last word. The knock came hard, 3 times, shaking the door. I opened it before the 4th could land. Lauren stood there, snow tangled in her hair, her face flushed with cold and fury. "You really think you can just erase us?" she shouted before even stepping inside. "Do you know what you've done?" I stayed calm. "You should come in, it's freezing." "I'm not here for tea," she snapped. "You embarrassed me. Evan's furious. He says this could ruin everything." I tilted my head. "Everything you built on lies?" "Stop acting like a victim," she fired back. "You think you're some hero taking a moral stand? You've destroyed your own family." I stepped closer, voice steady. "No, Lauren. You destroyed it when you decided that my worth was measured by what I could pay for." The wind howled through the open doorway, scattering snowflakes into the hallway. She crossed her arms tight like she was holding herself together. "You've gone too far. You're punishing us for trying to have a better life." "You don't even hear yourself," I said quietly. "You say us like you're still my child, but all I hear is Evan." She flinched, then scowled. "Don't you dare talk about my husband." "Your husband," I said, "who coached you to forge my signature? Who told you I'd never notice because I was old, alone, and too sentimental to fight back?" She froze. The words hit her like a slap. "Who told you that?" "You did," I said, "when you slipped up earlier." Lauren's breath came in quick bursts, turning to fog in the cold air. "You're twisting my words." "I don't need to," I said. "They were already crooked." That broke something in her. She stormed past me, into the living room, pacing like a caged animal. "You always make everything about betrayal and sacrifice. Maybe if you'd been less obsessed with control, we wouldn't have had to take it." I followed her slowly. "Control? Is that what you call stealing?" "Stealing?" she repeated, her voice trembling. "We deserved that money. You wouldn't even have it if it weren't for us helping you after Dad died." I stared at her, genuinely stunned. "Helping me?" "Yes," she insisted. "You couldn't handle the accounts, the maintenance, the villa paperwork. Evan took care of everything. You think we did that for fun?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You did it for ownership, Lauren, and you finally got it, at least for a while." Her voice cracked. "We needed stability. You had more than you'd ever spend, and we had responsibilities. You have no idea what that's like." I stepped closer, my voice low but firm. "I know exactly what responsibility feels like. It's what built that villa, that house, your entire life. What you call need, I call greed." She looked at me like she couldn't recognize the person standing there. Maybe she couldn't. Maybe she'd built such a careful version of me in her head, soft, forgiving, easily swayed, that this one felt like a stranger. Outside, the storm thickened. Wind swept against the windows with a dull roar, rattling the panes. Lauren turned toward the door. "I can't talk to you when you're like this." "Then don't talk," I said. "Just listen." She froze, hand on the doorknob. "You want to know the truth?" I continued. "You've been so desperate to prove you're powerful, you became the very thing you hated, someone who uses people for convenience. You've built your identity around pretending to be stronger than me, but the second the money stopped, you came running here shouting like a child." Her hand trembled on the knob. "You're cruel," she whispered. I stepped closer, my voice soft but heavy. "No, Lauren, I'm honest. For the first time, I'm not afraid of how the truth sounds." She turned back toward me, her eyes glassy. "Evan said you'd make this difficult." "And you believed him," I said. "That's what hurts the most. You believed a man who looks at people as investments." "He's not like that," she snapped. "You don't know him." "Oh, I know him," I said. "I've known men like him my whole life. Men who hide weakness behind charm. Men who convince women like you that power means having someone else pay the bills." She stepped forward, her face inches from mine, eyes blazing. "At least he believes in me." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't move. I just said, "No, Lauren. He believes in what you can take." And that stopped her. The words sank deep, and for a moment she couldn't speak. She looked down, her breath ragged, shoulders shaking. Snow whirled against the windows, catching the glow of the lamp like ash in a fire. "You don't understand," she said finally, her voice breaking. "I didn't want it to be like this, but every time I tried to make you proud, you reminded me how much I owed you. Every success I had came with a price tag." I felt my anger fade, replaced by something colder. Sorrow, maybe. "I never wanted payment, Lauren. I wanted respect. But you only saw value in what could be transferred." She pressed her palms to her face, sobbing quietly. "You make it sound like I'm a monster." I stepped closer, my tone gentle but unyielding. "No, sweetheart. Just lost. And you can still find your way back, but not on my money." The storm outside hit harder, wind howling like it was part of the conversation. She lowered her hands slowly, her eyes red. "I don't know how to fix this," she whispered. "You can't," I said. "Not tonight, maybe not ever, but you can stop lying to yourself." For a moment she just stood there, breathing heavily, snow melting in her hair. Then she turned and walked toward the door, opening it wide. Cold air rushed in, stinging my skin. Halfway out, she stopped and said, almost to herself, "Evan said you'd never notice." I met her gaze. "He was wrong," I said quietly. "I always notice. I just stopped reacting. Until now." She stepped into the snow without another word. The storm swallowed her almost instantly, her coat blending into the white. I watched until her car lights disappeared down the street. Then I closed the door, locked it, and leaned against the wood. The silence afterward was so thick it almost had weight. For the first time, I let myself cry, not from sadness, but release. The tears came hot and fast, but they felt clean. That night, both passed through me. The next morning arrived gray and muted, the kind of light that makes everything look like a photograph from another time. I hadn't slept. The snow outside had calmed into a soft white sheet, untouched except for the faint trail of Lauren's tires that had already begun to fade. The house felt hollow, but not empty, like it was holding its breath. I sat by the kitchen window with a cup of tea that had long gone cold when I heard the knock on the door. It wasn't sharp or frantic this time. It was steady, familiar. When I opened it, Marjorie Quinn stood there, bundled in her wool coat, holding a foil-covered pie dish and a look that said she'd already heard enough. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, her breath fogging in front of her. "Morning, Liv," she said. "You look like you've been wrestling ghosts." "In a way I have," I replied. "Come in." She brushed snow from her coat and stepped inside, stamping her boots on the mat. The smell of cinnamon drifted up from the pie she set on the counter. "I brought apple," she said. "Figured you could use something warm that didn't come from your own kitchen." "That obvious, huh?" I said. Marjorie gave me one of her knowing smiles. "Only to someone who's been there." We sat at the table, two old women surrounded by the soft hum of silence. She poured herself tea without asking, the way only true friends can. "So," she said, cutting straight through the quiet, "when did the explosion happen?" "Last night," I said. "She came back. It wasn't pretty." "It never is," Marjorie replied. "But it's necessary." I stared into my cup. I told her the truth. All of it. "Good," she said simply. "How'd it feel?" "Like standing barefoot in snow," I said after a pause. "Cold, shocking, but cleaner somehow." Marjorie chuckled softly. "That's the thing about truth. It doesn't warm you right away. It just stops the bleeding." And we both sat quietly for a moment, the only sound the faint ticking of the clock. "She said some things," I continued, things that made me realize how much she resents me. I kept thinking, where did she learn that kind of cruelty? Then I remembered, maybe from me. Marjorie raised an eyebrow. You? Cruel? Don't flatter yourself, Olivia. You've been many things. Too forgiving, too patient, maybe too proud, but never cruel. I think I was, I said softly. Not in words, but in expectations. I made her believe she could have everything if she just worked hard enough. But what I really meant was if she worked like me, if she became me. Marjorie nodded slowly. We all do that to our children in some way. We call it love because it sounds better than control. Her voice was gentle, not accusing. You remember my son? She continued after a pause. The one who sold the house without telling me? Of course, I said. You called it the day your faith went up for auction. She smiled sadly. I let him, not because he deserved it, but because I was too tired to fight. I told myself I was choosing peace, but it wasn't peace. It was surrender. She leaned forward, her eyes meeting mine. You didn't surrender, Liv. That's why it hurts. I looked out the window. The snow was falling again, light and slow. Sometimes I wonder if it's worth it, I whispered. To lose your family just to keep your dignity. Marjorie reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. Her skin was warm, her grip firm. Dignity isn't something you lose, dear. It's something you either live with or live without. The choice just takes longer for some of us. I swallowed hard. She said I'd regret this. You might, Marjorie said, but regret's lighter than resentment. You can carry it without breaking your back. Her words landed like stones in a calm pond, heavy, sinking deep. She looked around the house, noticing the turned-down picture frames, the papers neatly stacked, the faint traces of a war already fought. So what now? She asked. I don't know, I said. I've done everything I can legally. The trust is in place. Chloe's protected, but I still feel unfinished. Marjorie nodded. Because you haven't forgiven yourself yet. For what? For waiting so long to act. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. She smiled, softer now. You know, Liv, you've always had that calm way of breaking rules. You make rebellion look like good manners. That made me laugh for the first time in days. Is that what this is? Rebellion? It's redemption, she said, just quieter. We sat in silence again, this time a good kind, the kind that fills a room instead of draining it. After a while, Marjorie stood and walked to the window. You see that? She asked, pointing outside. I followed her gaze. A small bird, a sparrow maybe, was hopping along the snow, leaving tiny prints behind. What about it? I asked. It's looking for crumbs, she said. It doesn't know if there's any food left, but it keeps looking anyway. That's faith, Liv. Not in God or family. In motion. In the act of not giving up. I watched the bird for a long moment. I envy that. Don't, Marjorie said, turning back to me. You've been feeding others your whole life. Maybe it's time to let someone else scatter the crumbs. I smiled faintly. You always know how to make survival sound poetic. It's not poetry, she said, walking back to the table. It's old women's wisdom. We've earned it. She placed her hand on my shoulder. Show them you remember everything, Liv. That's your power, not revenge. Memory. I nodded slowly. Maybe you're right. Of course I'm right, she said with a grin. Now eat some pie before it gets cold. You'll need the sugar for whatever comes next. We ate in quiet companionship, the kind that only exists between two people who've seen too much and still choose to sit together anyway. The pie was warm, fragrant, imperfect, just like forgiveness. When Marjorie finally stood to leave, the snow had stopped again, and the sun was beginning to sink behind the trees. She buttoned her coat, adjusted her scarf, and looked back at me from the doorway. You're not cruel, Liv, she said softly. You're finally equal. Her words echoed long after the door closed. I walked back to the table and looked out at the snow-covered yard. The sparrow was gone, but the prints remained, tiny marks across a white field, proof that something small had moved through and survived. The snow had started melting by the time he came. A gray slush covered the driveway, and the afternoon light had that dull, heavy tone that makes everything feel slightly out of tune. I was in the living room, folding the blanket on the couch, when I heard the sound of tires grinding to a stop outside. I didn't have to look. I already knew. The knock that followed wasn't polite. It was firm, impatient, the kind that doesn't ask for permission. I opened the door to find Evan standing there, tall and polished as ever, his coat still dusted with melting snow. He looked like a man who'd practiced confidence in the mirror and was afraid it might fail him now. His smile was the kind that hides anger, tight, professional, ready for battle. "Mrs. Hensley," he said, like we were in a courtroom. "We need to talk." I stepped aside. "Then come in. The cold doesn't help anyone think straight." He walked in, his shoes leaving wet marks on the floor. He didn't bother taking them off. His eyes scanned the room, calm, calculating, as if he was already looking for something to control. "I'll get straight to the point," he said. "Lauren's been upset, understandably so. She tells me you've made some drastic financial decisions." "I did," I replied. "They were long overdue." He gave a small laugh, the kind that sounds like condescension wrapped in charm. "You know, most people consult their family before making moves that affect them." "Most people," I said, "don't treat family like an investment portfolio." The smile twitched. "You're angry, I get it. But cutting off payments without warning, freezing accounts, it creates unnecessary tension. Lauren's been distraught." "Distraught because the cash flow stopped," I said evenly. "Not because she lost her mother's love. She traded that a long time ago." He exhaled through his nose, a sign of frustration he couldn't quite hide. "Look," he said, walking toward the table, "I don't want this to become legal, but you've tied up assets that affect property under both names. The Aspen Villa isn't just yours anymore." I met his gaze, calm and unshaken. "Oh, but it is. The deed was never transferred. You might want to read the fine print next time you forge my signature." That cracked his composure. The smile faltered, the mask slipping for just a second. "You can't prove that." "I don't need to," I said quietly. "Harper can." He blinked. "Harper Alvarez?" "Yes," I said. "Jonas's old colleague. She remembers him fondly. And she also remembers the day you came by her office 3 months ago, asking questions about my estate." Evan's eyes darkened. His jaw worked silently before he forced a dry chuckle. "You've been busy." "I've been awake," I said. The tension in the room shifted. He walked closer, his voice lowering. "You think this makes you powerful, Olivia? You think cutting us off makes you righteous?" "I think it makes me free," I said. He leaned on the table, close enough that I could smell his cologne, something expensive, too sharp. "Lauren's my wife. Everything she has, everything she's entitled to, affects me. So, yes, this affects me too, and I won't let you sabotage her future out of spite." I stood my ground. "Spite doesn't sign legal documents, Evan. People do. People who thought I wouldn't notice." His voice hardened. "Be careful with what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything," I said. "I'm confirming it." For a moment, his calm facade cracked wide open. He straightened, pacing slowly around the room like a wolf that had lost its scent. "You really want to turn this into a fight?" he said, his tone quieter now, more dangerous. "Because I assure you, I don't lose easily." "I'm not fighting," I replied. "I'm defending what's mine. You just don't like that the ground finally moved beneath your feet." He stopped pacing and looked at me with something almost like pity. "You're making a mistake, Olivia. You're going to die one day, and this money, all this power you think you're holding, it won't matter." I smiled faintly. "You're right, but it matters now, and that's enough for me." He laughed again, but this time it came out hollow. "Lauren said you'd become difficult. I didn't believe her. I thought maybe age had softened you." "Age doesn't soften everyone," I said. Some of us get sharper. Evan's face shifted. The charm drained out completely. What was left was cold calculation. You know, I could make this messy. Legally, financially, publicly. You could, I said, but you won't, because everything you have is built on illusion. And the moment you make noise, the truth gets out. And people like you don't survive truth. You survive appearances. He stared at me for a long time, silent, measuring. Then, finally, he smiled, slow, deliberate. You really think this little act of rebellion changes anything? You're alone. Lauren has me. And the future is ours. Then why are you here, Evan? I asked. He didn't answer right away. He just stood there, the silence betraying him. Finally, he said, "Because I like to understand my enemies." I nodded slowly. "Then understand this. I'm not your enemy. I'm your consequence." For a long time, neither of us moved. The wind outside rattled the window pane, a low hum like the world holding its breath. Then Evan straightened his coat and said, "You'll regret this." "I've already regretted enough for one lifetime," I said. He turned toward the door. His reflection passed briefly across the glass, sleek, controlled, vanishing. "You're making a fool of yourself," he muttered. "Good," I said softly. "That's better than being someone else's fool." He froze for a moment, hand on the doorknob, then left without another word. The door shut behind him with a clean, heavy sound that felt like punctuation. I stood there for a while, watching the gray light fade outside. My hands were steady. My breath came easy. The silence that followed wasn't fragile anymore. It was firm, solid, earned. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. A message from Harper. "Everything confirmed. Power of attorney revoked. Trust secured. They have no access." I smiled. Small, calm, final. "They feared losing money," I whispered. "Not losing me." I walked to the window and watched Evan's car drive away, a dark streak against the pale snow. The storm had passed, but the ground was still hard, frozen, unyielding. So was I. The next morning arrived wrapped in stillness, the kind of quiet that feels intentional, like the world had decided to pause before something inevitable. I woke before dawn, the air inside the house sharp with winter chill. The snow had stopped completely, and the sky was turning a faint blue, that fragile shade just before sunrise, when light and shadow still share the same breath. I moved through the house slowly, barefoot on the wooden floor. Every sound, the creak of a board, the click of the kettle, felt amplified in the silence. There was no chaos left, no arguments or slammed doors, only space. On the kitchen table lay a neat stack of documents, trust forms, receipts, and photocopies of 176 transactions. The evidence of years of quiet giving, and of one single night when I finally pressed stop. Each paper carried both proof and peace. I began sorting through them, one by one. Some were faded, coffee-stained from mornings long gone. Others were crisp, untouched, reminders of how habit can disguise itself as love. I placed them into folders, labeling each carefully. Aspen Villa, Education Fund, Household Transfers, Miscellaneous. By the time I finished, the first sunlight touched the edge of the table. It fell across the papers like a benediction. A soft knock interrupted the silence. I opened the door to find Chloe standing there, her cheeks pink from the cold, her scarf wrapped twice around her neck. She held 2 paper cups of coffee. "You said you liked it black with 1 sugar," she said, smiling shyly. I stepped aside. "You remembered." She shrugged. "I remember everything about you." We sat by the window together, the light slowly filling the room. For a while, neither of us spoke. The quiet between us wasn't heavy. It was warm, like 2 people breathing in rhythm after a long storm. Finally, Chloe said softly, "Mom told me you canceled everything." I did. She's been crying a lot, Chloe added. But not because of money, I think. I think she's scared. She should be, I said. Then after a pause, but not of me, of herself. Chloe looked down at her coffee, tracing the rim of the cup with her finger. Do you still love her? I took a deep breath before answering. Love doesn't disappear, sweetheart. It just changes shape. Sometimes it turns into silence. She nodded, biting her lip. You're not going to the meeting, are you? I am, I said. They called it a family discussion. That usually means ambush. Chloe's eyes widened. You shouldn't go alone. I won't be, I said. Harper will be there. She smiled faintly. The lawyer lady? Yes. She's sharper than anyone gives her credit for. Chloe hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I made you something, she said. It was a small sketch, pencil on cream paper. It showed a woman sitting by a window, a teacup in her hands, snow outside the glass. The expression on her face was calm, almost serene. It's you, Chloe said quietly. After everything. I looked at it for a long time. It's beautiful, I said. She smiled. I just wanted to draw you the way I see you. Not sad, just strong, like you already won, even if they don't know it yet. I felt my throat tighten. You have your mother's eyes, I said. But your heart, that's yours alone. Chloe leaned forward and hugged me, arms tight, chin on my shoulder. For a moment, the years of distance between generations felt like they melted. When she pulled back, her voice trembled a little. Whatever happens tomorrow, I'm proud of you, Grandma. Tomorrow, I said, will just be the end of a story that started the moment I stopped apologizing for being right. After she left, I stayed at the table, staring at the sunlight spilling across the papers. I began arranging them into a single box, black leather, the kind Jonas once used for his lectures. I placed the folders inside carefully, then closed the lid. The sound of the latch clicking felt like a heartbeat steadying itself. I stood up and moved to the living room. Every corner of the house carried echoes, pictures, trinkets, little ghosts of happier years. I didn't feel anger anymore, only clarity. The difference between loss and liberation is small, but once you cross it, you never go back. The phone buzzed, a message from Harper. Meeting confirmed for 10 a.m. at the Aspen Villa. Be prepared for confrontation. Stay calm. I typed back, always. Outside, the sun was fully up now, turning the snow into a glittering field of light. I made tea, poured it into my favorite porcelain cup, the one Jonas gave me on our 20th anniversary. It had a small crack along the rim, barely visible unless you looked closely. I ran my thumb over it, imperfect, but unbroken. I carried the cup to the window, sat down, and watched the steam rise. The world was silent again, but this time it didn't feel empty. It felt ready. For years I had been the background of everyone else's story, the reliable giver, the quiet listener, the woman who understood. Now, for the first time, I felt like I was about to speak in my own language. In the reflection of the window, I saw myself, older, steadier, and strangely peaceful. People always say storms bring destruction, but I've learned they also bring clarity. They strip away everything false and leave you only with what can survive. I took one last sip of tea, set the cup down gently, and whispered to the quiet room, "Let them come." The clock ticked once, twice, and somewhere deep inside, I felt a pulse of calm power, not the kind that shouts, but the kind that waits. Peace isn't the absence of war. It's knowing the truth before the noise starts. The drive to Aspen was long and silent, just as I wanted it. The world outside the car window was an endless stretch of white, mountains wrapped in snow, sky pale as bone. The road curved upward like a slow inhale, and with every mile, I felt the same calm settle deeper inside me. Not relief, not anger, just certainty. Harper was beside me in the passenger seat, her reading glasses perched halfway down her nose, a leather briefcase resting on her lap. She didn't speak much. She didn't have to. Her presence was like a steady metronome, reminding me to keep my rhythm. "You're sure about this?" she asked eventually. "I've never been more sure of anything," I said. "Then let them talk first," she advised. "People who lie always think noise protects them." The villa appeared like a ghost among the trees, a monument to all the years I mistook indulgence for love. The same stone steps I once climbed with excitement now looked colder, harder. 2 cars were already parked outside. One of them, Evan's black SUV, gleamed under the winter sun like an animal waiting to attack. When we stepped inside, the smell of polished wood and expensive perfume hit me like a memory I didn't ask for. The fire was lit, but the warmth didn't reach anyone. Lauren sat near the fireplace, dressed impeccably, her hair pulled back tight. She stood when she saw me, forcing a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "Mom," she said, "you came." "I was invited," I replied. "It would have been rude to decline." Evan rose from the couch, his tone already rehearsed. "We appreciate that. Let's sit down, have a calm talk." Harper nodded at me subtly. The signal. I took the chair opposite them. Chloe sat quietly in the corner, her presence like a small, steady flame. Her hands were clasped in her lap, her eyes fixed on me. Evan began, his voice smooth. "We're here because there's been confusion, miscommunication about the accounts, the villa, and certain legal changes." "Miscommunication," I repeated, rolling the word around like it had an aftertaste. "That's an interesting way to describe theft." Lauren's eyes flashed. "Mom, that's unfair." "No, darling," I said softly, cutting her off. "What's unfair is raising a daughter who believes love is a transaction." The room went still. Even the fire seemed to quiet. Evan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You're emotional," he said. "Understandably so. But this isn't about emotions. It's about property, titles, and shared interests." Harper's voice, calm and clear, broke the air. "Mrs. Hensley's interests are already secured. The trust has been legally filed, and the accounts are under her sole authority. If this meeting is about demanding reinstatement, I advise you to stop before you incriminate yourselves." Evan turned toward her, eyes narrowing. "And who exactly are you?" "Harper Alvarez," she said, unflinching. "Attorney of record. I've known the Hensley family for 30 years. You might remember calling my office 3 months ago." That landed like a rock in water. His confidence wavered. Lauren spoke quickly, desperate to fill the silence. "This isn't a courtroom, Harper. We just want to understand why Mom is doing this to us. We're family." I met her gaze. "Family," I said quietly. That word used to mean something to me too, until I realized I was the only one still living by it. Lauren swallowed, her voice shaking. "You don't understand. Evan and we've been under so much pressure. The villa, the business. It's not just luxury, it's investment. You cutting us off, it hurts everyone." "It hurts the ones who depended on deception," I said, "and it heals the one who finally stopped enabling it." Evan shifted in his seat, his tone tightening. "You think you can embarrass us with all this moral posturing, but at the end of the day, every check you wrote was voluntary. No one forced you." "No," I said. "No one forced me. That's what makes it worse. I chose blindness." Harper opened her briefcase and laid a folder on the table. "Mrs. Hensley has prepared full documentation of the transactions. You'll find 176 payments totaling over $890,000, each made in good faith, each marked as family support." Evan's jaw flexed. "What's your point?" I reached for the folder, opened it, and began laying each sheet across the table slowly. The sound of paper against wood filled the room. "1, I said softly. 2, 3. Lauren frowned. "What are you doing?" "Counting," I said. "The same way I did every month. One act of generosity at a time, until I realized I wasn't helping. you were feeding. By the 10th sheet, she looked pale. By the 20th, her hands were trembling. These aren't payments, I said. They're proof of love disguised as transactions, proof of how much I gave to people who never looked up from the checks long enough to see who was signing them. Evan stood abruptly. Enough of this spectacle. I looked up at him, calm and steady. Sit down, Evan. You'll want to hear the rest. He hesitated, just a flicker, but it was enough. He sat. I took a deep breath and looked at my daughter. Lauren, when you were 10, you once told me you wanted to be like me when you grew up. I didn't realize that meant learning how to hide pain behind a smile. Her lip trembled. Mom, please. I'm not angry anymore, I said. I'm just awake. From her briefcase, Harper pulled out another envelope and placed it in front of me. Mrs. Hensley has one more document to share. I slid it across the table toward Lauren. My new will. The color drained from her face. You changed it? I did, I said softly. Everything I owned in your name, the accounts, the villa, even this house, it's gone. The trust is now in Chloe's name, managed until she turns 25. Evan's hand slammed against the table. You can't do that. Harper didn't flinch. She already did. Legally, irrevocably. Chloe gasped softly, tears welling in her eyes. Grandma, you didn't have to. I did, I said. Because you're the only one who still understands what giving means. Lauren's voice broke. You're punishing us. You're destroying our lives. No, sweetheart, I said quietly. I'm setting boundaries. You destroyed them years ago. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the fire seemed to dim, as if the room itself needed to breathe. Evan spoke first, his tone low, venomous. You think this is over? You think you've won because you made us look like fools? This isn't the end. I met his glare without blinking. It is for you. I gathered the papers slowly, one by one, and stacked them neatly. 176 payments, I said again, almost like a prayer. Each one proof of love, each one returned unpaid. No one spoke. Lauren's breathing hitched. Evan's jaw was tight enough to crack. I rose from my chair, Harper following quietly behind me. At the door, I turned back once more. You both always thought money gave you power, I said softly, but real power is walking away with your peace intact. Then I left the villa. Outside, the wind was still. The mountains stood silent and pale under the sun. For the first time, the world didn't look cold anymore. It just looked honest. And for the first time in years, so did I. The silence in the car on the way back to Denver was a living thing. Harper drove, steady and composed, but I could feel her glancing at me now and then, maybe wondering if I'd break down or cry or rage. I didn't. The storm had already passed through me. What was left wasn't anger. It was completion. But by the next morning, the phone calls began. First Lauren, then Evan, alternating between pleading and fury. I didn't answer. Each ring was a ghost trying to drag me back into the past. By afternoon, Harper called. They've filed a motion to contest the trust, she said. They're trying to freeze your accounts in retaliation. I smiled faintly. Predictable. She hesitated. Do you want me to handle it quietly or publicly? Publicly, I said. Let them hear what truth sounds like when it doesn't whisper. 2 days later, we stood again in a formal room, not a courtroom, but it might as well have been. A long oak table divided the space, cold winter light cutting through the blinds. Lauren sat on one side, her makeup perfect, but her hands shaking. Evan beside her, stiff, glaring, a man cornered by his own schemes. Harper stood next to me, her calmness razor sharp. Across the table, a clerk read aloud the petition they'd filed. Words like undue influence, mental instability, questionable competency. I didn't flinch. When they finished, Harper nodded politely. We'd like to respond. The clerk gestured for her to proceed. Harper turned toward Lauren and Evan. For the record, my client is of sound mind. Every transaction and legal adjustment was filed properly, notarized, and verified by the Summit Trust Bank. I have statements from Mr. Reynolds confirming Mrs. Hensley's intent and lucidity. She placed a thick folder on the table. The sound echoed like a gavel. Evan smirked faintly. Paperwork can be manipulated. Harper smiled in return. So can people, but not when the documents include your signature. His expression changed instantly. She slid another page forward, a printed form bearing his name. This is the forged authorization for financial access filed under Mrs. Hensley's account 6 months ago, cross-referenced with handwriting analysis and bank timestamps. You signed as co-beneficiary without consent. That's a felony. The color drained from his face. That's ridiculous. It's recorded, Harper said, calm as ice, and verified. Lauren looked at him in shock. You told me it was... He cut her off. Don't. But she didn't stop. You told me it was approved, that Mom agreed. Evan's eyes flicked to her, cold and warning. Not here. Harper closed the folder slowly. We'll file this evidence with the appropriate authorities if the petition isn't withdrawn today. Lauren stared at Evan, realization breaking across her face like glass. You lied to me. He didn't answer. His silence said enough. The room felt airless. Every breath waited. I didn't move, didn't gloat. I simply said, You traded love for lifestyle, Lauren, and he sold you the receipt. Her lips parted, trembling. Mom, please. I didn't know. I held up a hand gently. You did. You just didn't want to. Her voice cracked. I thought we were building something. I thought... You were, I said softly. But you built it on someone else's foundation, and now it's collapsing. She covered her face with her hands. Evan stood, muttering, This is absurd. But his confidence was gone. He looked smaller now, like a man stripped of costume. Harper gathered the documents calmly. We'll submit the withdrawal form. I assume you'll want to avoid a full investigation, Mr. Madsen. He glared at her, then at me. You think this makes you noble? You've humiliated your own daughter. I looked straight at him. No, Evan. I freed her, even if she doesn't know it yet. He scoffed, grabbed his coat, and stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. The echo lingered long after he was gone. Lauren stayed seated, silent, staring at the empty chair he'd left behind. For a long time, no one spoke. The snow outside had begun falling again, soft, slow flakes against the glass. Finally, she whispered, What happens now? That's up to you, I said. But as for me, I'm done living on conditional love. Her eyes filled with tears. I don't know how to fix this. You don't, I said gently. You heal it, and that takes time. She looked down, then nodded weakly, wiping her face. When she finally stood to leave, she reached for the papers on the table, the ones she'd brought to accuse me. But halfway she stopped. Her hand hovered there, then fell to her side. I'm sorry, she whispered. I nodded. That's a start. When the room emptied, Harper closed her case and exhaled. That was cleaner than I expected. Justice usually is, I said. We walked out together, the cold air biting but pure. The parking lot was silent, except for the crunch of snow beneath our shoes. As we reached my car, Harper turned to me. You did the right thing, Olivia. I didn't do it to be right, I said quietly. I did it to be free. The sky was the color of slate, heavy but calm. I looked up at it and felt something shift, the weight lifting, the air lighter. When I got home that evening, the house greeted me like an old friend. I set down my coat, lit a single lamp, and sat by the window. The storm outside whispered softly against the glass, but it no longer sounded threatening. It sounded like closure. The phone buzzed once more. Another message from Lauren. I opened it. I signed the withdrawal. I told Evan to leave. I'm sorry, Mom. Please take care of yourself. I love you. I stared at the screen for a long time before typing back. I always did, Lauren. That was never the problem. I placed the phone face down on the table and reached for my tea. The reflection in the glass showed a woman calm, tired, but steady. The morning light came slowly, spilling across the curtains like a slow exhale after holding one's breath too long. The house felt different, lighter somehow, as if it too had finally been released from something invisible. I woke before the alarm, the quiet hum of the heater the only sound in the room. The snow outside had stopped falling, leaving a smooth white blanket that seemed untouched by the chaos of the night before. I made tea the same way I always did. 1 scoop of leaves, water just below boiling, poured into the cracked porcelain cup Jonas once bought me in Florence. I sat by the window, the same spot where I'd watched storms and heartbreak alike. The same, yet everything had changed. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful. There was no phone ringing now, no messages demanding explanation. Just stillness, pure and honest. For years I had chased peace through giving, through sacrifice, through endless justification. But peace, I'd learned, doesn't arrive when you earn it. It arrives when you stop apologizing for it. Around 9, the doorbell rang. I knew that knock before I even reached the door. Gentle, rhythmic, the kind of sound that came from kindness rather than need. Chloe stood outside, bundled in a thick sweater and her favorite gray scarf. Her cheeks were pink from the cold, her hands clutched around a small brown bag. "Morning, Grandma," she said softly. "Morning, sweetheart. Come in before you freeze." She stepped inside, pulling off her gloves. "I brought pastries from the bakery near my school. I remembered you liked the almond ones." I smiled, taking the bag. "You remembered right." We sat at the table, the same one where I had once sorted through the papers of my undoing, now cleared, polished, and peaceful. She poured tea for both of us, hands careful, deliberate, like she knew the ceremony mattered. For a while, we didn't speak. We didn't have to. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was the kind of quiet that heals, that fills the air with things that don't need words. Finally, she said, "Mom told me everything." I nodded. "I figured she would." "She said you forgave her." I looked down at my tea. "Not quite, but I stopped needing her to understand." Chloe tilted her head. "Is that the same thing?" I smiled faintly. "Maybe it's better." She thought for a moment, then reached into her bag again and pulled out an envelope. "This came for you," she said, "from the villa. The realtor dropped it off this morning." I opened it carefully. Inside was a document. Property listing, Aspen Villa, for sale. Below it, a note in Lauren's handwriting. "I'm letting it go. I don't deserve to keep what was never really mine. L." I folded the paper slowly, pressing it flat. For a long time I said nothing. Then I whispered, almost to myself, "Good. It's time she started over with her own hands." Chloe looked at me with those wide, honest eyes that reminded me of her mother when she was little, before the world taught her to measure love in bank statements. "She's scared, Grandma," Chloe said, "but I think she's trying. She even got a job. She said she's learning what it's like to earn something herself." I nodded slowly. Then maybe she's finally living instead of collecting. We sat quietly again, sipping tea, the sound of the clock soft and steady. The house no longer felt haunted. Every room seemed to exhale. After a while, Chloe smiled gently. "I start college next year, you know." "I know," I said. "Your scholarship came through?" She grinned. "It did. The letter came yesterday." I reached across the table and took her hand. "That's wonderful, Chloe." She squeezed my fingers, her eyes glimmering. "It's because of you." I shook my head. "It's because of you. I just made sure no one got in your way." She looked at me for a long moment, then whispered, "I'll visit every weekend." "You don't have to," I said. "I want to." Something in my chest ached. Not pain, but fullness. "Then I'll make sure there's always tea waiting." Outside, the snow began to melt, drops sliding down the window like glass tears that didn't hurt anymore. The air carried that faint scent of thawing earth, the smell of something ending and something beginning. Chloe helped me wash the dishes after breakfast, humming quietly under her breath. She'd grown into a woman without losing her softness, something I hadn't realized could exist together until I saw it in her. As she packed up to leave, she turned at the door and said, "You know, Grandma, I think you won." I smiled. "It wasn't a competition, sweetheart." "Then what was it?" "Just life," I said. "Finally lived on my own terms." She hugged me tightly before stepping outside. I watched from the doorway as she walked down the path, footprints marking the fresh snow. When she turned back to wave, her smile carried all the things I had once wished to hear from her mother: gratitude, pride, love without transaction. When the door closed again, the quiet wrapped around me like a soft blanket. I walked through the house, touching small things as I passed: the photo frame, the lamp Jonas had repaired years ago, the piano no one had played since Lauren left for college. Nothing felt bitter anymore. Even the empty spaces felt earned. In the living room, I sat by the fireplace and opened my journal, the same one I'd kept since Jonas's passing. The pages were filled with confessions, regrets, and fragments of thoughts I'd never said aloud. I turned to a blank page and wrote slowly, "They thought love meant obedience. I thought love meant sacrifice. Maybe we were both wrong. Love, when done right, should mean freedom." I underlined the last word twice. As evening crept in, the house glowed with soft gold light. I made another cup of tea and sat by the window again. Outside, the villa's reflection no longer haunted me. The horizon looked endless. A single text buzzed on my phone. Lauren again. "Thank you for not hating me." I typed back, "I never did. I just had to stop pretending your love was enough to live on." No reply came, but I didn't need one. The house was quiet. The tea was warm. And for the first time, I felt peace, not as a reward, but as a right. I leaned back in my chair, watching the snow melt into rivulets of silver under the setting sun. 6 months later, I was in Tuscany, a place that looked like peace had found a home. The mornings there were golden, the hills breathing light, the air thick with quiet. Marjorie and I rented a small farmhouse overlooking the vineyards. She called it our second act. We spent our days drinking tea instead of coffee, walking the dirt roads, laughing about things we once cried over. The silence between us no longer felt heavy. It was warm, honest, alive. One morning, as I was sketching the view from our terrace, the postman arrived on his bicycle, waving a pale blue envelope. "Signora Hensley," he said, smiling. The handwriting on the front made my chest tighten. "Chloe." I opened it slowly. "Grandma, I got the scholarship. I'm moving to Florence next month. Mom sold the villa. She said you were right. About everything. She's trying, Grandma. And I'm proud of her. I'll come see you soon." At the bottom was a small sketch, me holding a cup of tea under an Italian sky. I didn't cry this time. I just smiled. Marjorie returned with 2 cups of wine. "Good news?" she asked. "She's coming," I said simply. "They both are, in their own ways." We toasted quietly, the glasses catching the last of the sunlight. Below us, the vineyard shimmered. A soft breeze brushed my face, gentle, forgiving, familiar. I thought of Denver, of Lauren's trembling voice, of Chloe's laughter, of Jonas's steady hand guiding me through memory. Every piece of the past had led here, to this quiet table in Italy, where nothing hurt anymore. "They thought I'd die waiting for their love," I whispered, watching the horizon. But I lived, finding my own. The sun sank behind the hills, leaving the sky painted gold, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was surviving. I felt free.